I think this war is looking still pretty catastrophic for Russia. And whether there's an exit from that or not, I think really remains to be seen. But I think Istanbul will definitely be the kind of venue for a really interesting and potentially kind of, era-defining showdown between those two sides.
Now, Russia appears to be finally willing to end the war in Ukraine. President Zelenskyy is optimistic enough to be open to have new direct talks with Russia, but only if Russia signs up to an immediate ceasefire, which of course has been proposed by Ukraine's European allies in Kyiv yesterday. Here is what President Putin had to say at an extraordinary 2 a.m. press conference in the Kremlin.
We propose to start immediately on Thursday, the 15th of May, in Istanbul, the venue that held those talks before. Tomorrow, a phone conversation is planned with the Turkish President Erdogan, and I will ask him to provide the opportunity to hold talks in Turkey. I really hope he will confirm his desire to facilitate peace in Ukraine. We're committed to holding serious talks with Ukraine in order to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, to arrive at an enduring, long-lasting peace.
Well, we've heard this morning from the Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Committee chair, a member of President Zelensky's party. This is Alexander Mereshko.
We have a peace proposal, ceasefire proposal, put forward by the coalition of the willing. This ceasefire proposal is about unconditional ceasefire. If it is rejected, then there should be very serious consequences, including sanctions.
Well, Chatham House fellow Keir Giles told us Putin may only be doing this because he's overplayed his hand with the Americans.
It's possible that the apparent shift in attitude of the Trump White House might be the most significant, because Putin, it appears, has overplayed his hand. He could have had a much more advantageous outcome from from accepting what the United States was offering on a plate and freezing the conflict in a very favorable way for Russia several weeks ago. But no, they decided to press forward, to push that military advantage, to demand more, and it looks as though they may have shot their bolt.
Well, President Putin's comment in the middle of the night came just hours after European leaders, the coalition of the willing, met in Kyiv to call for a 30-day ceasefire, or Russia would face new and massive sanctions. Sir Keir Starmer was certainly clear.
No more ifs and buts, no more conditions and delays. Putin didn't need conditions when he wanted a ceasefire to have a parade, and he doesn't need them now.
Well, let me read you President Zelensky's tweet, which has come out in the last hour or so. It is a positive sign that the Russians have finally begun to consider ending the war. The entire world has been waiting for this for a very long time. And the very first step in truly ending any war is a ceasefire. There is no point in continuing the killing even for a single day. He goes on to say, we expect Russia to confirm a ceasefire, full, lasting and reliable, starting tomorrow, May the 12th, and Ukraine is ready to meet. Well, let's speak now to Gabriel Gavin, who is Politico's foreign affairs reporter. Morning, Gabriel.
Good morning.
What do you take from that tweet? Because there's quite a lot to read into.
Yeah, well, I think it's really clear that Vladimir Putin's bluff has been called. You know, for a long time, Western leaders, the Trump administration, they've been trying to push for a ceasefire. And up until now, Putin has flatly refused to actually adhere to one. Now, following those announcements in Kyiv just yesterday, there is more and more pressure to agree to a 30-day ceasefire. It's clear still Putin doesn't want to do that. So I think this is about buying time. It's about working out what the proposals are. But I also think that we shouldn't underestimate just how costly this war has been for Russia. Just how hard-hitting the sanctions have been, just how hard-hitting Ukrainian strikes on their, for example, oil and gas industry have been. I think this war is looking still pretty catastrophic for Russia. And whether there's an exit from that or not, I think really remains to be seen. But I think Istanbul will definitely be the kind of venue for a really interesting and potentially kind of, era-defining showdown between those two sides.
What do you think has forced Putin's hand at this point?
I think it's the unpredictability of Trump, right? I think this is there's the kind of madman factor in all of this. And that Trump coming into the presidency seemed like very good news for Putin. J.D. Vance has been outspokenly anti-Ukrainian. And I think it initially looked, and especially here in Brussels, EU leaders were petrified that actually Trump was about to completely pull the rug out from underneath the Ukrainians. That doesn't seem to have happened. And President Zelensky has been really effective at kind of sitting down with Trump after that very infamous now White House kind of Oval Office clash. He caught him at the Vatican during the Pope's funeral. And they seem to have built a much, much stronger relationship. And it's Russia that's dragging its feet. It's Russia that's not agreeing to terms. It's Russia that's not coming to the table. And I think now Trump's move does seem to be turning.
I guess the danger here for President Zelenskyy is, because he's saying there has to be a ceasefire before he's willing to meet for talks, could this turn everything on its head and mean that Zelenskyy could then be perceived as dragging his feet? Could Trump then turn against Zelenskyy and Putin going, look, I offered talks, he doesn't want to come?
Well, nobody knows anything about when it comes to Trump, right? I mean, he could do and think whatever he wants. But I think the critical thing here is that Trump has actually been quite outspoken about the need for a ceasefire. And he's done these kind of a series of infamous Truth Social posts where he says, Vladimir, stop. And I think, he's made it clear that he wants to see a ceasefire. He wants to do a deal. He wants the killing to end. And I think that puts Zelenskyy in a much stronger position to be able to say, well, if you want to sit down with us, do what President Trump is saying. So for now, the stars are kind of aligned. And I think Ukraine has actually far more of the cards than Trump said was the case, during that Oval Office showdown.
Putin is obviously saying that he wants Turkey to be the place where these ceasefire talks or peace talks could take place as early as this week. How likely do you think it is that will happen, and on that kind of timescale?
I think the likelihood is rising. I think it's pretty clear that the Ukrainians see this as a positive sign. To quote Zelenskyy on that, I think it's clear that the Russians need to show that they're willing to do at least something, at least talk about talking. Whether or not, at what level those discussions take place. I mean, it's very unlikely that we see Putin travel to Turkey, for example. Although Turkey, as a choice of destination, it's not a party to the Rome Statute. It's not a member of the International Criminal Court. It wouldn't be legally obliged to enforce the arrest warrant out against Putin for war crimes. So he potentially could go. I think that's still a way off. I'm sure they'll want to have preparatory talks with, kind of senior envoys, maybe up to and including the foreign ministers. But I think just the fact that these talks are taking place is quite an extraordinary sign of where we're going. And, we haven't had these talks in Turkey for at least, a year and a half or 2 years now in this kind of format. So it is a really kind of significant moment in the progress of the war.
And in light of Putin's move saying that he wants to have these talks, what are the chances of the Coalition of the Willing, who yesterday announced that there would be massive new sanctions imposed on Russia tomorrow if there isn't a ceasefire? Do you think they're likely to happen, or do you think they will hold fire on that?
I think it's really unclear. I think whether the US is on board with the Coalition of the Willing, as it's called now, is unclear. How far they want to go down that route. Trump's threatened sanctions before. I mean, here in the EU, we've had successive sanction packages being held up and delayed simply because you require all 27 member states to agree on them. And Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has completely refused to consider really some of the sharpest tools in the arsenal, for example, targeting Russia's nuclear fuel exports, squeezing its oil and gas further. So I think, sanctions can be announced and, there'll be companies, there'll be individuals that can be targeted in here, but actually to have a kind of, across this Coalition of the Willing, unified approach is going to be very difficult. And actually, this is an area where, since Brexit, the UK has actually been able to act with a much freer hand and actually hit, for example, some of those shadow fleet tankers carrying Russian energy in violation of sanctions unilaterally without having to depend on, Budapest.
Gabriel, it's always good to get your assessment. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Take care. That is Gabriel Gavin. He is Politico's foreign affairs reporter.
So today is a consequential day. Whatever happens next, whatever Putin decides, whatever he says today, will have consequences. Either he accepts the pressure that he is under to go for the 30-day ceasefire and therefore begin peace talks on Thursday, or he rejects that again, and the war continues, and the Coalition of the Willing, the US President and President Zelenskyy need to think of a new tack to take with all of this.